The Amtrak Acela hummed along its tracks, slicing through the morning mist from Washington, D.C. to New York. Inside the VIP car, plush leather seats gleamed under soft lighting, and the clink of wine glasses mingled with the low hum of wealthy passengers in tailored suits and designer dresses. But one woman stood out like a sore thumb. Middle-aged, she wore a faded sweater and worn joggers, her small suitcase tucked quietly at her feet. She settled by the window, her face calm but unassuming, as if she belonged anywhere but here. Eyes darted her way almost instantly. A man in a pinstripe suit snorted loudly. "Who let her in?" he said, his voice carrying across the car. The other passengers smirked, their gazes slicing through her like knives. The train attendant, a young woman with a tight blonde bun, approached with a forced smile. "Your ticket, please," she said, her tone dripping with skepticism, as if the woman had snuck in. "You sure you're in the right car?" The car erupted in muffled laughter, but the woman didn't flinch. She handed over her ticket, her hands steady, her eyes unwavering. They had no idea who she was. This simple woman, dismissed as an outsider, was Ambassador Alicia Thornton, America's most powerful diplomat, freshly appointed as the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. Her work had brokered peace across continents, but here she was just a nobody in a faded sweater. What would happen when the truth came crashing down? A secret was about to unravel, one that would leave this train car and the world speechless. The morning sun spilled through the narrow windows of a modest apartment in D.C.'s Adams Morgan neighborhood, casting golden streaks across a cluttered coffee table. Alicia Thornton, 52, stood in the middle of her living room, zipping up a small suitcase. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, and her face, free of makeup, carried the quiet strength of someone who'd seen the world's highs and lows. In a faded sweater and joggers, she looked like any other woman heading out for a routine trip. But Alicia was anything but ordinary. Just 7 days ago, the president had named her the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, a role that cemented her as one of America's most influential diplomats. Her career was a tapestry of impossible victories, brokering peace in war-torn regions, negotiating ceasefires where others saw only chaos. She'd advised 2 presidents, her sharp mind and unshakable principles earning her respect from allies and adversaries alike. Yet, to look at her now, you'd never guess. Her apartment was a cozy jumble of books, family photos, and a single-framed award tucked behind a potted plant, as if she didn't care for the spotlight. Alicia hadn't always lived in the world of high-stakes diplomacy. She'd grown up in a gritty corner of Detroit, where the air smelled of factory smoke and hope was a rare commodity. Her grandmother, a seamstress who worked until her fingers bled, raised her after her parents passed in a car accident. "You might not have power, child," her grandmother would say, "but you've got dignity. Don't let anyone take that." Alicia carried those words like a shield. She sold newspapers after school to buy textbooks, clawed her way through college, and landed a scholarship to Georgetown's School of Foreign Service. From there, she built a career that took her from smoky back rooms to the halls of global power. In her hand, she held a worn silk scarf, a gift from her grandmother before she passed. Alicia ran her thumb over its frayed edges, a ritual that grounded her. She tucked it into her pocket, a quiet reminder of where she came from. Today, she was headed to New York for an emergency meeting at the United Nations. The agenda was monumental: a peace treaty to halt a brewing conflict in a volatile region, one that could save millions of lives or ignite a global crisis. Alicia was the linchpin, her negotiation skills the only hope for a deal. But she'd chosen to travel by train on the Amtrak Acela, declining the Secret Service escort her team had urged her to take. "Why the train, Alicia?" her best friend Sarah asked, leaning against the kitchen counter with a mug of coffee. Sarah, a journalist who'd known Alicia since college, shook her head. "You're the U.S. ambassador now. You don't have to play the humble card anymore." Alicia chuckled, slinging her suitcase over her shoulder. "I'm not playing anything. I just want one last trip as plain old Alicia before the world starts calling me Madam Ambassador." She glanced at her phone, where a text from her assistant buzzed. "Ambassador, the press is sniffing around. Stay low-key." Alicia smiled faintly. Low-key was her specialty. Sarah wasn't convinced. "You're about to negotiate a treaty that could change the world, and you're taking a train like some regular commuter? What if something goes wrong?" "Nothing's going to go wrong," Alicia said, though her voice held a trace of defiance. "I've spent my life fighting for people who don't get fancy escorts or private jets. The minute I start acting like I'm above them, I've lost the plot." She hugged Sarah tightly. "I'll be fine, it's just a train ride." The truth was, Alicia cherished these moments of normalcy. After next week's official ceremony, her life would be a whirlwind of security details, press conferences, and diplomatic dinners. For now, she wanted to be just another passenger blending into the crowd. Her suitcase held only the essentials, a change of clothes, her briefing notes, and that silk scarf, her anchor to the past. At Union Station, the bustle of DC's morning commute swallowed her up. Commuters rushed past, their eyes glued to phones or coffee cups. Alicia moved through security with ease, her government ID barely raising an eyebrow. Her face hadn't yet been plastered across headlines. The White House had honored her request to keep her appointment quiet until the formal announcement. She found a quiet bench in the terminal and pulled out a dog-eared book on international law, its pages marked with her neat handwriting. It wasn't the kind of reading most people expected from a woman in a faded sweater, but Alicia had never cared about expectations. The boarding call for the Acela echoed through the station. Alicia joined the line, her ticket clutched in hand. Around her, passengers chatted about business deals or weekend plans, their voices a steady hum. A few VIPs in crisp suits brushed past, their briefcases gleaming. Alicia watched them with a faint smile, amused by the contrast. She'd sat across from world leaders, but here she was invisible, and that was exactly how she wanted it. As she stepped onto the train, the VIP car loomed ahead, its polished interior a world apart from the crowded economy seats she'd ridden as a student. She handed her ticket to the attendant, who scanned it without a second glance. "Enjoy your trip, Miss Thornton," the attendant muttered, barely looking up. Alicia nodded and found her seat, 5B, by the window. She stowed her suitcase under the seat, a habit from years of budget travel, and settled in, her book open on her lap. Outside, the platform blurred as the train pulled away. Alicia's phone buzzed with another text from her assistant. "Security's not happy about you traveling solo. Call if you need us." She tucked the phone away, her mind already shifting to the meeting ahead. The treaty was a beast. Thorny issues, stubborn stakeholders, and a ticking clock. But Alicia thrived in chaos. She'd faced worse odds and come out on top. What she didn't expect was the chaos waiting in this very car. The VIP passengers, with their polished exteriors and inflated egos, were about to make a mistake they'd never forget. Alicia Thornton, the woman they'd soon dismiss, was no ordinary traveler, and the train ride she'd hoped would be quiet was about to become anything but. The Amtrak Acela glided smoothly along its tracks, the VIP car a cocoon of luxury. Polished wood paneling gleamed under soft lights, and the faint clink of glassware punctuated the murmur of conversation. Alicia Thornton sat by the window in seat 5B, her worn sweater and joggers a stark contrast to the tailored suits and silk dresses around her. She opened her book on international law, its pages dog-eared from years of study, and settled into the rhythm of the train. Her dark hair, loosely tied, framed a face that held no trace of the power she wielded. To anyone watching, she was just a woman out of place, a nobody who'd wandered into the wrong world. Across the aisle, Edward Langston, a 58-year-old CEO of a major defense contractor, lounged in his seat. His Patek Philippe watch caught the light as he sipped a glass of bourbon, his sharp eyes scanning the car. Edward was a man who measured worth in dollars and influence, and Alicia's presence offended him instantly. He'd built his empire on deals that thrived in the shadows of conflict, and his disdain for anyone who didn't fit his mold was palpable. Years ago, Alicia, then a senior State Department official, had penned a report that flagged his company for profiting off war-torn regions. The report cost him a lucrative contract, but he'd never met her face-to-face, until now, though he didn't recognize the woman in the faded sweater. Edward leaned toward the man next to him, his voice loud enough to carry. "Who let the homeless lady in here?" he said, gesturing at Alicia with a smirk. The man, a younger executive in a cheap suit, chuckled nervously, glancing at Alicia. A woman in a sleek designer dress across the car stifled a laugh, her manicured hand covering her mouth. Alicia's fingers tightened on her book, but she kept her eyes on the page, her face unreadable. Claire Mitchell, a 28-year-old train attendant with a tight blonde bun and a practiced smile, moved through the car, offering drinks to passengers. Her warmth was reserved for those who looked the part, men in Rolexes, women in pearls. When she reached Alicia's seat, her smile vanished. "Something to drink?" she asked, her tone clipped, as if Alicia's request was an inconvenience. "Just water, please," Alicia said, her voice calm and polite. Claire nodded curtly and returned with a flimsy plastic cup, unlike the crystal tumblers she'd given others. She set it down with a slight thud, her eyes flicking over Alicia's outfit with undisguised judgment. "Let me know if you need anything else," she said, though her tone suggested she hoped Alicia wouldn't. The car buzzed with quiet chatter, but the undercurrent was clear. Alicia didn't belong. Edward, emboldened by the bourbon, raised his voice again. "I paid good money for this car," he said, looking directly at Alicia. "You'd think they'd keep the riffraff out." The word landed like a slap, and a few passengers snickered. Alicia's jaw tightened, but she didn't look up. She reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing the silk scarf her grandmother had given her, its soft texture grounding her. She'd faced hostile rooms before, warlords, dictators, corporate titans. This was nothing, she told herself, though the sting of public humiliation was sharper than she'd expected. Claire returned, pushing a cart with steaming trays of food. She served Edward first, her smile bright as she offered him a plate of seared salmon. When she reached Alicia, she paused, her eyes narrowing. "The hot meals are for our regular VIPs," she said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I can get you a sandwich if you want." The implication was clear. Alicia wasn't worth the premium service. A woman 2 seats away whispered to her companion, "Probably can't afford it anyway." Alicia met Claire's gaze, her voice steady. "A sandwich is fine, thank you." Claire smirked and moved on, skipping Alicia's row entirely when she returned with the dessert cart. Alicia unwrapped the sandwich, a dry turkey on stale bread, and took a bite, her movements deliberate. She'd eaten worse, growing up in Detroit, scraping by on whatever her grandmother could afford. But the laughter around her, the pointed glances, dug deeper than hunger ever had. Edward wasn't done. He leaned across the aisle, his voice dripping with condescension. "So, what's your story?" he asked Alicia, as if she were a curiosity. "Win a free upgrade or something?" The younger executive beside him grinned, egging him on. "Yeah, must have saved up a lot of points," he added, his tone mocking. Alicia closed her book, her eyes meeting Edward's. "I'm just traveling for work," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Work?" Edward laughed, loud enough to turn heads. "What, cleaning houses? Or maybe you're one of those street vendors outside Penn Station?" The car erupted in chuckles, and Alicia felt heat creep up her neck. She'd faced down world leaders without blinking, but there was something raw about this, the casual cruelty of strangers who saw her as less than human. She gripped the scarf in her pocket, her anchor, and forced a small smile. "Something like that," she said, returning to her book. A few rows back, Maya Patel, a 25-year-old diplomatic aide, watched the scene unfold. Maya had met Alicia at an international conference a year ago, where Alicia's keynote on peace building had left the room in awe. Now, seeing her idol treated like this, Maya's stomach churned. She clutched her phone, her thumb hovering over the record button. She'd started filming when Claire refused Alicia's meal, capturing Edward's taunts and the car's laughter. But speaking up felt risky. Her career was just beginning, and crossing a man like Edward could end it. She whispered to her colleague beside her, "That's Ambassador Thornton. They have no idea who she is." The colleague, a junior staffer, raised an eyebrow. "The UN ambassador? You sure?" Maya nodded, her heart racing. "I'd know her anywhere. She's on her way to the peace talks." Maya's hands trembled as she kept filming, torn between fear and fury. She wanted to stand up, to call out the injustice, but the weight of the moment held her back. Edward, oblivious to Maya's presence, kept going. He pulled out his phone, answering a call with deliberate volume. "Langston here," he said, his voice booming. "Yeah, I'm headed to New York for the UN meeting. That peace treaty, total waste of time. My company's got contracts lined up no matter what happens." He laughed, glancing at Alicia as if to underline his importance. "Some people think they can play hero, but money talks louder than words." Alicia's eyes flicked up from her book, just for a moment. She knew Edward's name. His company had been flagged in her briefing for the UN meeting. They were under scrutiny for fueling the very conflict she was trying to end. The irony wasn't lost on her, but she said nothing, her face a mask of calm. She'd learned long ago to pick her battles, and this wasn't the place. Yet Claire passed by again, her cart rattling. She stopped to refill Edward's bourbon, her smile syrupy. When Alicia raised a hand to ask for more water, Claire's response was sharp. "You'll have to wait, ma'am," she said, her voice carrying. "I'm serving priority passengers first." Heads turned, and Alicia felt the weight of every stare. She nodded, her expression unchanged, but inside, the humiliation burned. She'd negotiated with tyrants who respected her more than this car full of strangers. A young couple nearby whispered loudly, their words meant to be overheard. "That scarf she's holding? Probably picked it up at a thrift store," the woman said, giggling. The man nodded. "Yeah, looks like something my grandma would wear." Alicia's fingers tightened on the silk scarf, its value far beyond anything they could imagine. It had been her grandmother's prized possession, sewn with love during long nights at the factory. To Alicia, it was worth more than every designer bag in this car. Maya's phone stayed steady, capturing every slight. She zoomed in on Claire's dismissive sneer, on Edward's smug grin, on the passengers' mocking laughter. Her heart pounded, but she kept filming, knowing this moment mattered. Alicia, unaware of the camera, sat quietly, her dignity intact despite the onslaught. The train sped toward New York, and the tension in the VIP car grew thicker with every mile. The passengers thought they'd won, that they'd put this nobody in her place. They couldn't have been more wrong. The Amtrak Acela hummed through the countryside, its VIP car thick with tension. The air was heavy with the scent of bourbon and entitlement, punctuated by the occasional clink of glassware. Alicia Thornton sat by the window in seat 5B, her faded sweater and joggers a quiet rebellion against the polished wealth around her. Her book on international law lay open, but her fingers rested on the silk scarf in her pocket, its familiar texture steadying her against the barrage of insults that had filled the past hour. The laughter and sneers from her fellow passengers had stung, but Alicia's face remained a mask of calm, her eyes sharp and unyielding. Across the aisle, Edward Langston, the defense contractor CEO, leaned back in his seat, his Patek Philippe watch glinting as he swirled his drink. His taunts had rallied the car, turning Alicia into a punching bag for their amusement. Claire Mitchell, the train attendant, had matched his disdain, her cold service and sharp words reinforcing the message. Alicia didn't belong. The other passengers, emboldened by Edward's lead, had joined in with whispers and giggles, their judgment as cutting as any blade. But the car was about to learn a lesson they'd never forget. Maya Patel, the 25-year-old diplomatic aide seated a few rows back, clutched her phone, her heart pounding. She'd been filming the entire ordeal, Edward's mocking comments, Claire's dismissive sneers, the passengers' cruel laughter. Maya had recognized Alicia from a conference a year ago, where the diplomat's speech on peace-building had left her in awe. Now, watching her idol endure this humiliation, Maya's anger boiled over. She'd hesitated too long, paralyzed by the fear of crossing a man like Edward, whose influence could crush her fledgling career. But enough was enough. Maya stood, her legs trembling but her voice steady. "Excuse me," she said, loud enough to cut through the car's chatter. Heads turned and the hum of conversation died. Edward raised an eyebrow, annoyed at the interruption. Claire paused mid-step, her tray of drinks wobbling. Maya took a deep breath, her eyes locked on Alicia. "You're all making a huge mistake. This woman isn't who you think she is. She's Ambassador Alicia Thornton, the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. She's negotiated peace across 3 continents." The car fell silent, the kind of silence that swallows sound whole. Edward's glass froze halfway to his lips, his smirk vanishing. Claire's face drained of color, her tray clattering as she gripped it tighter. The woman in the designer dress gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Passengers exchanged stunned glances, their earlier laughter now a bitter memory. Alicia looked up from her book, her expression calm but her eyes piercing. She hadn't asked for this moment, but it had arrived. Maya wasn't done. Her voice grew stronger, fueled by the injustice she'd witnessed. "And she's on this train to attend an emergency UN meeting. She's leading negotiations for a peace treaty that could save millions of lives. A treaty that's investigating companies like yours, Mr. Langston, for profiting off war." She pointed at Edward, her words landing like a grenade. Edward choked on his bourbon, his face turning ashen. His company, Langston Defense, was under scrutiny for supplying weapons to the conflict Alicia was working to end. The UN meeting was a threat to his empire, and Alicia was the one steering it. He'd just spent an hour mocking the woman who held his future in her hands. His mouth opened, then closed, words failing him. The car watched, riveted, as the man who'd led the charge against Alicia unraveled. Alicia set her book down, her movements deliberate. She reached up and untied her ponytail, letting her dark hair fall naturally. The simple act shifted something in the car. She was no longer the nobody they'd dismissed. She looked at Maya, a faint nod of gratitude, then turned to Claire. "Respect doesn't require a title," she said, her voice low but resonant. "I wanted to be just another passenger today, but it seems that's too much to ask." Claire stammered, her hands twisting around her tray. "Ambassador Thornton, I had no idea. We weren't told about any VIPs. Her voice was high, panicked, but Alicia's gaze didn't waver. "That's the problem, isn't it?" Alicia said. "You shouldn't need to know who I am to treat me like a person." The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Claire's eyes dropped to the floor, her earlier confidence gone. Alicia turned to Edward, who was still frozen, his bourbon forgotten. "You said I didn't belong here," she said, her tone even but laced with steel. "You thought I was nothing. So tell me, Mr. Langston, who do you think should be deciding the fate of your company at the UN tomorrow?" Edward's face crumpled, the weight of his mistake crashing down. He'd insulted the one person who could dismantle his empire with a single report. I didn't mean," he stuttered, but Alicia raised a hand, silencing him. "I've spent my life fighting for people who are dismissed, ignored, or exploited," she said, her voice rising just enough to command the car. "People like you, Mr. Langston, profit from their suffering. You think I don't belong here? Maybe it's you who doesn't belong in a world that values peace." The car was deathly still, every passenger hanging on her words. The woman in the designer dress stared at her lap, her earlier laughter a distant memory. The young executive who'd mocked Alicia's points shrank into his seat, his face red. Maya's phone was still recording, though she'd lowered it slightly, her hands shaking. Passengers around her had pulled out their own phones, capturing the moment. Whispers of "Ambassador Thornton" and "UN" rippled through the car, and someone typed furiously on their phone, the hashtag "Ambassador on board" already taking shape. The energy shifted. Where there had been scorn, there was now a mix of awe and shame. A man in his 60s, who'd stayed silent until now, stood and clapped slowly. "You're right, ma'am," he said, his voice gruff. "We judged you too fast. I'm sorry." A few others nodded, their faces flushed with guilt, but Edward and Claire remained silent, their worlds upended. Edward's mind raced. He was due at the UN meeting tomorrow where Alicia's influence could sink his company. Claire, meanwhile, saw her job flashing before her eyes, her casual cruelty exposed for all to see. Alicia picked up her book again, but her eyes lingered on Maya. "Thank you," she said softly, a rare warmth in her voice. Maya blushed, clutching her phone like a lifeline. I couldn't let them keep doing that to you," she said. Alicia's smile was small but genuine. "Sometimes it takes one voice to change everything." The train sped toward New York, but the VIP car was no longer the same. Passengers avoided Alicia's gaze, their earlier bravado replaced by unease. Edward buried himself in his phone, scrolling frantically, likely texting his lawyers. Claire moved through the car like a ghost, her hands unsteady as she served drinks she no longer cared about. The videos being uploaded to social media were spreading like wildfire, and the world was about to know what had happened here. Alicia, though, seemed untouched by the chaos. She turned a page in her book, her mind already on the UN meeting. The treaty was her focus, not this petty drama, but she knew the moment had shifted something larger. The passengers thought they'd humiliated her, but they'd only exposed their own flaws. And Edward Langston, the man who'd called her a nobody, was about to learn just how powerful this nobody could be. The Amtrak Acela slowed as it approached Penn Station, its sleek frame gliding into the heart of New York City. Inside the VIP car, the air was thick with unease. the earlier laughter and smugness replaced by a tense silence. Alicia Thornton sat by the window in seat 5B, her faded sweater and joggers untouched by the chaos she just ignited. Her book on international law lay open, but her mind was already at the United Nations, where a peace treaty awaited her. The silk scarf in her pocket, a gift from her grandmother, felt like a quiet anchor as the train came to a stop. The car was still reeling from Maya Patel's bombshell. The 25-year-old diplomatic aide had revealed Alicia's identity as the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, exposing the cruelty of Edward Langston and Claire Mitchell. Edward, the defense contractor CEO, sat rigid, his bourbon abandoned, his face a mask of dread. He'd mocked the woman who could dismantle his company at tomorrow's UN meeting. Claire, the train attendant, moved mechanically, her blonde bun unraveling as her career teetered on the edge. The other passengers, once eager to join the taunts, now avoided Alicia's gaze, their phones buzzing with the videos they'd recorded. As the train doors opened, the platform was a frenzy. Reporters jostled for position, cameras flashing, their shouts of "Ambassador Thornton" echoing through the station. Amtrak officials in crisp suits stood anxiously at the gate, flanked by security. Someone on the train had tipped off the press, likely a passenger who'd posted about the incident on social media, where Ambassador on board was already trending. Alicia stepped off the train, her small suitcase in hand, her expression calm but resolute. The crowd parted for her, their whispers a mix of awe and curiosity. Claire, trailing behind with her cart, caught sight of the chaos and froze. An Amtrak supervisor approached her, his face grim. "You're off duty, Mitchell. We need to talk, now." Claire's hands shook as she nodded, her earlier sneer replaced by panic. She turned to Alicia, her voice barely a whisper. "Ambassador Thornton, I'm so sorry. I didn't know who you were." Alicia paused, her eyes meeting Claire's. "That's the point," she said, her tone firm but not unkind. "Apologize to the people you've treated this way, who don't have a title." Claire's face crumpled and she turned away, the weight of her actions sinking in. Edward was less composed. As he stepped onto the platform, reporters swarmed him, their microphones thrusting forward. "Mr. Langston, did you know you were insulting the UN ambassador?" one shouted. "Is it true your company's under investigation?" Edward's jaw tightened, his eyes darting for an escape. "No comment," he muttered, pushing through the crowd, his usual swagger gone. Behind him, two men in suits, likely his crisis PR team, whispered urgently, already scrambling to contain the damage. Edward's phone buzzed relentlessly, texts from his board of directors piling up. He knew the truth. Alicia's influence at the UN could cost him everything. Alicia, meanwhile, slipped through the chaos with the ease of someone used to navigating storms. A black SUV waited outside, sent by her team despite her protests. She climbed in, her focus shifting to the UN meeting. The treaty was a beast, complex, contentious, and vital. Edward's company, Langston Defense, was one of the players profiting from the conflict she aimed to end. At the UN, Alicia led the negotiations with surgical precision, her voice steady as she pushed for accountability. By evening, the treaty was signed, and a formal investigation into Langston Defense was launched. The news broke on CNN, with Alicia's name at the center. Her quiet strength now a global story. Back at Penn Station, Maya Patel emerged from the train, her phone still warm from recording. Her video, uploaded during the final minutes of the ride, had exploded online, racking up 12 million views in hours. #RespectForAll trended alongside Ambassador on board, with thousands sharing stories of being judged for their appearance. Maya's inbox overflowed with messages, some praising her courage, others offering job opportunities. She spotted Alicia in the crowd and hesitated, then approached. "Ambassador Thornton, I hope I did the right thing," she said, her voice trembling. Alicia's smile was warm, a rare crack in her composed exterior. "You did more than that, Maya. You reminded people what's at stake when we judge too quickly." Maya blushed, clutching her phone. "I just couldn't let them treat you like that." Alicia nodded. "Keep that fire, the world needs it." As Alicia left, Maya felt a spark. She'd just changed her own future. The fallout was swift and brutal. Amtrak's stock plummeted 7% by midday, the company reeling from the PR disaster. The CEO appeared on MSNBC, his face somber. "We failed Ambassador Thornton and every passenger who deserves respect." "We're overhauling our training and policies effective immediately." Claire was formally suspended, her tearful plea for a second chance ignored. She later joined a community education program, admitting in a quiet interview, "I judged her by her clothes. I was wrong, and I'm learning to do better." Edwards' reckoning was even harsher. The UN investigation into Langston Defense uncovered damning evidence, costing the company a $2 billion zero-cents contract. His board demanded his resignation and he stepped down, retreating to a Long Island estate to avoid the media. In a desperate bid for redemption, he donated millions to a UN peace fund, but he never mustered the courage to face Alicia. His name, once synonymous with power, became a cautionary tale in corporate circles. The story didn't stop at Penn Station. Maya's video sparked a national conversation. Schools held assemblies on class bias inspired by Alicia's dignity. The View dedicated a segment to invisible prejudice, with panelists sharing their own stories of being underestimated. Social media buzzed with posts about snap judgments, from baristas misjudged by CEOs to teachers dismissed by parents. Alicia's experience became a mirror, forcing people to confront their own biases. Alicia, however, had little time for the spotlight. At the UN, she worked late into the night, drafting follow-up measures for the treaty. Her phone buzzed with messages, congratulations from colleagues, support from the president, even a note from her old friend Sarah. "You're trending, Alicia. Told you the train was a bad idea." Alicia chuckled, but her focus remained on the work. The treaty wasn't just a document, it was a lifeline for communities ravaged by war. She'd fought for them her whole life, from the streets of Detroit to the halls of power. Maya, meanwhile, received an unexpected call. Alicia's team offered her a role as a junior aide at the UN, a chance to learn from the woman she'd defended. "You've got the heart of a diplomat," Alicia told her over the phone. Maya's eyes welled up, her decision to speak up now a turning point. She packed her bags for New York, ready to step into a world she'd only dreamed of. As the dust settled, the VIP car incident became a cultural touchstone. Amtrak rolled out mandatory bias training, using Alicia's story as a case study. Edwards' downfall was dissected in Forbes, a warning to executives who wielded power without humility. Claire's quiet efforts to educate others earned her a small redemption, though she'd never work for Amtrak again. And Alicia, the woman they'd called a nobody, emerged as a symbol not of vengeance, but of grace under fire. She carried on, her silk scarf a constant reminder of the grandmother who'd taught her to hold her head high. The world watched her now, but Alicia didn't care for the fame. She'd boarded that train to do her job, and she'd done it, leaving a legacy far bigger than anyone in that VIP car could have imagined. 6 months later, the United Nations headquarters in New York buzzed with activity, but Alicia Thornton's office was a quiet haven. At 52, she sat at her desk, her faded sweater traded for a simple blazer, though her grandmother's silk scarf lay folded nearby, a touchstone of her roots. Papers on the latest peace talks were spread before her, each one a step toward a world with less bloodshed. The train ride that had sparked a firestorm felt like a lifetime ago, but its echoes lingered. Alicia's work at the UN had only grown. New treaties, tougher sanctions on war profiteers, and a voice that carried weight across borders. The incident on the Amtrak Acela had made her a reluctant icon, her dignity in the face of scorn inspiring headlines and TED Talks. Schools now taught her story, using it to spark discussions on class and bias. Amtrak, humbled by the fallout, had become a model for diversity training, with Alicia's experience a cornerstone of their curriculum. Letters poured in from strangers, tucked into a drawer beside her scarf. One, from Claire Mitchell, the former train attendant, stood out. "You showed me how wrong I was. I'm teaching others to see past appearances now." Alicia smiled, setting it aside. Claire had found a path forward, however small. Edward Langston, the disgraced CEO, had faded into obscurity, his donations to peace funds a silent apology he never voiced to her. Maya Patel, the young aide who'd spoken up, now worked by Alicia's side, her courage on that train launching a promising career. Alicia leaned back, her gaze drifting to the scarf. Her grandmother's words rang true. Dignity was her shield, no matter the stage. The world had tried to diminish her on that train, but she'd risen above, not with anger, but with purpose. Respect she'd shown wasn't tied to titles or clothes. It was owed to everyone, from the poorest streets to the grandest halls. She stood, slipping the scarf into her pocket, ready for another day of fighting for those who had no voice. The train ride had changed lives, not just hers, but countless others who now questioned their judgments. Alicia hadn't sought the spotlight, but she'd used it to shine a light on truth. Every person deserved to be seen, no matter what they wore or where they sat.